Hi, I'm Davey Cretin from Cretin Classics. Hello, everyone. Today's video is all about the Ramones. I'm going to discuss why the Ramones weren't a bigger band. They should have been a much bigger band than they were. Unfortunately, they were not. So I'm going to discuss that in the video. And as a bonus, at the end of the video, I'm going to discuss where my name, Davey Cretin, comes from. So way back in 1976, the Ramones released their first album, simply entitled Ramones, in April of 1976. July 4th, when we here in America, when we were celebrating our bicentennial, the Ramones were actually in England playing their first ever show overseas. They were playing at the Roundhouse in England. And this was supposed to be an infamous show that the Ramones played, and everybody who later formed a punk band was supposed to be there. Well, that's not true. It's a myth. It's sort of like everyone who says, I was at Woodstock. No, not everyone who says they were at the original Woodstock in the 60s was actually at the Woodstock Festival. But getting back to the Ramones, at this show, the Ruts were there, the Adverts, a lot of other people, the Roundhouse, a famous place in London for gigs. Turns out that the Sex Pistols and the Clash were actually playing shows that night. So the next night, the Ramones played a sold out show at a place called Dingwalls. And that's where the Clash and the Sex Pistols members, that's where they actually saw the Ramones. They were not at the initial show at the Roundhouse. So the Ramones had a huge influence on the British punk scene. And as we know, the British punk scene turned out to be, it was because basically the British economy was not doing too well in the late 70s, the mid to late 70s. So a lot of people were depressed economically, and I guess you could say mentally too, and physically. So the youth were rebelling with this new thing called punk music. And although punk was huge in England and probably a little bigger in continental Europe, it really didn't do that much here in America. The radio stations wouldn't play it, and the punks in England had a very bad reputation, or what a lot of Americans considered a bad reputation. They put safety pins through their nose, they wore ripped clothing, and they were just causing chaos and trouble out in the streets in England. Part of this is true, part of it isn't. It was also the thing about spitting. This whole myth developed about the bands spitting on their fans, the fans spitting on the bands, vice versa. So Americans, especially down south and in the Bible Belt and in middle America, just thought punk was this horrible thing. And there were news programs like 2020, and there were actually talk shows like Phil Donahue, if I remember correctly, where they discussed the evils of punk rock. And don't let your children get involved in punk rock because they'll be spitting on each other and they'll be slam dancing and they're going to do drugs and they'll go to ruin and it'll be the worst thing for your children to be into punk rock. So in America, punk rock was looked on as a very bad thing. Meanwhile, it was a very short musical movement in England. It didn't last for too long, a couple of years at the max, before it turned into post-punk and then new romantic and new wave, and just the music scene moved on from punk. So the Ramones were sort of tarred and feathered when they came back to America after these triumphant, big selling shows in England. They played a lot of small clubs in America, and they were on bills with other bands, and they were always on unusual bills. Like they played with Blue Oyster Cult. Now I love Blue Oyster Cult, but Blue Oyster Cult and the Ramones sort of don't go together too well. They also played for played with blues rock guitarist Johnny Winter. So they were on some very strange bills in America because the Ramones were the biggest punk band in America. So they always thrust on these weird bills, and they never achieved a big touring audience. So they were mainly playing theaters and clubs back in the 70s, unless they were on these huge stadium shows, arena shows with other bands that they definitely didn't fit on the bill with at all. And a lot of radio stations also got word that the Ramones were this punk band. So they didn't get much airplay. Plus the lyrics. I mean, they had great catchy songs, and I love the Ramones. In fact, in the future, I will be doing a ranking of all the Ramones studio records. I'm definitely planning that because I'm such a big fan. So getting back to the Ramones in radio, they had very catchy songs, but the record company, they had signed with a record company, like an independent boutique label called Sire Records. The Talking Heads were also on this record label. A lot of other bands in that vein. And it was owned by Seymour Stein and his wife Linda Stein. So they got distribution through Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers owned Sire, but Sire Records always seemed to be accidentally, not on purpose, working against the Ramones. They released the wrong singles. They released singles at the wrong time of year, which I'll get to in a moment. The Ramones had catchy songs, as I was saying. Beat on the Brat is a very catchy song, but with the lyrics, beat on the brat, beat on the brat, beat on the brat with a baseball bat, radio stations weren't going to play something like that in 1976, 1977, around that era, because it sounded wrong. Of course, the Ramones meant it in good humor, and it was their take, and it was Dee Dee's funny lyrics. But the powers that be didn't see it that way. So the Ramones really never got a lot of radio airplay. And then when they released singles, they released Rockaway Beach, one of their greatest songs. If memory serves, it's their highest charting song on the Billboard charts at number 66. But a song like Rockaway Beach, all about the pleasures of going to the beach, sort of an update on an old Beach Boys type summer song. Instead of releasing a song like that in the springtime or the summertime, that song was released in November, at the end of autumn, at the beginning of winter. Why would you release a beach song at that time of year? So all these factors, this confluence of events, it just went into making the Ramones just not as big as they should have been. And then once their records started selling X amount, the label just considered, okay, the Ramones are going to sell this amount of records. And the label just never gave them that big push. They should have, because the Ramones have so many catchy commercial songs that should have been hits. And in a perfect world, they would have been hits. And I think that this is the main reason, these are the main reasons, that the Ramones never became as big as they could have. They should have been a great band, they were an influential band, but they should have sold more albums. They should have had a much bigger profile. And unfortunately, it turns out that 20 years later or so, they did have a bigger profile. But by then, in the mid-90s, 96, 97, they had done their last studio album. They had done their farewell tour, and they had announced, that's it. The Ramones are ending. We've done 2,000 plus shows over the past 20 years. We're not doing anything else. Then, unfortunately, a few years later, they started passing away one by one. And now Joey, Johnny, Dee Dee, they're no longer with us. So all of the 4 original Ramones have passed away. Marky's still out there flying the flag. So that's what happened to the Ramones. And then in the mid-90s, this second wave, I guess you could say, of punk bands came into being. A lot of people don't even call them punk, but Green Day, The Offspring, Rancid, they all had bigger chart success and sold more units than the Ramones did. So it's just the way it turned out. It's just one of life's mysteries, and it's just the sad case of how they seem to have this bad luck, always releasing songs at the wrong time of year, the wrong singles, and just never getting that traction and that giant push from the label to become a huge band. So that's why the Ramones never were giants, although I always thought they were giants. Had a bunch of friends in the 80s, early to mid 80s, who turned me on to punk. I've worked with a lot of different people in the record stores over the years that I've worked at, and I've learned to appreciate different types of music, different subgenres of rock, different types of music. And I had friends, Bobby, Anthony, Carolyn, they're the ones, and their cousins, that turned me on to Ramones music back in the day. So I'll always be appreciative and grateful to them. And now I just want to say that I performed in a Ramones tribute band. My friend Josh, whom I used to work with, he's the one who came up with our initial band name, the Blitzcretins. And that came from the Ramones song Blitzkrieg Bop and another Ramones song, Cretin Hop. Put it together, Blitzcretins. So we became the Blitzcretins. Then when we had a membership change, we became Commando. Now with these two bands, I performed all around the tri-state area, mainly Long Island, Nassau County, Suffolk County, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn. Those are where we played most of our shows. We even did a show in Connecticut. But for over a decade, I was with these two bands, Blitz Cretins and Commando. So I was singing, I was the lead singer. I was actually, in actuality, I was playing Joey Ramone and did a lot of shows over that decade plus that we were together. And I think I counted it out. We once, between rehearsing and actually performing, we did over 100 Ramones songs. So I'm a big fan for many years. So in the band, I think it was Josh, my coworker at the time, who eventually ended up joining the band. He was our DD for a while, playing bass, singing a song or two, and doing background vocals. Great guy, Josh. But he's the one, I think, if I remember correctly, he also gave me my stage name of Davy Cretin. So I am a Cretin. That is my stage name, and I still go by that name. So that's how I got the name Davy Cretin, and that's the name of the channel. Came from that, derived from that. Cretin Classics. That's about it for this video. I want to thank you for watching, and that's just my opinion on why the Ramones never became a huge success as they should have when they were together performing. It seems like after all of that, they've had much more success, and everyone now is wearing Ramone shirts when they're probably not even fans of the band. I will be doing an upcoming ranking of the Ramones studio albums, so look for that in the coming months. I'd love for everyone to subscribe, like, and comment on this video. And maybe you want to tell me why you think the Ramones never became that superstar Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, Beatles, huge level band. Maybe you have some good reasons of your own that I'd love to hear. So I want everybody to rock out and pogo. Thanks. Take care.